Hey guys, how's it going? All right, I promised I would finish this chapter because, as I mentioned, we're going to have one of the TAs from the course teaching on Wednesday morning. I'll be there watching and giving advice, so sort of part of the training of TAs. Alrighty, so I do want to finish this up, so let me jump right back where I was. We were talking about these stages of sleep and how your brain activity changes, at least as reflected through the electrical activity. We were just kind of walking through. So, very quickly again, when you first go to sleep at night, you're in stage one. And you spend a little bit of time there. That's just when you're kind of relaxing and kind of sinking in. Um, Stage two is sort of a continuation of that process, but this is where you're really starting to lose consciousness. So your breathing is changing, your heart rate is slowing down, your body temperature is changing, and this is really you fully transitioning from a waking state into the really deep stages. So stages three and especially four are what we refer to as deep sleep. And this is where we're really out. We're asleep. We're asleep. Brain begins to generate these slow delta waves that we're talking about. You really see them in stage four. So again, low frequency, high amplitude waves here. And stage four really just continues with this very deep sleep, the rhythmic breathing, and limited muscle activity. And you get these big delta waves. So we will sometimes, refer to these things together as deep sleep. And stage one and stage two are kind of getting you down. Now, notice you spend a lot of time in stage two, and we kind of notice this. The deep sleep is the real relaxing sleep, but it takes us a while sometimes to get there, and we spend a lot of time in this sort of in between stage, just getting there. And then after we've finished our deep sleeps, that's when the dream period starts. And so one of the things I wanted to highlight is look at the electrical activity. You're right back to, pretty much like it is in stage one, which is pretty much like it is when you're awake and alert. And so your brain is essentially awake and alert, but your body is asleep. Because as I mentioned, there's a sleep paralysis that kicks in here and it prevents you from moving your body. So, a couple of points to mention about that. One is, by the way, it doesn't always work right for some people, and it can work wrong in two ways. So, there are some people for whom the paralysis doesn't happen. Their body is not paralyzed before they dream. They still go into dreams, but what happens with these people is they literally act out their dreams. Their arms and legs are flying around, and whatever's going on in their dream, that's what their body is doing. You do not want to end up in bed with one of these people when they're asleep because they will beat the crap out of you, literally, as they fling around. And so those people, really tell us why the body does this in the first place. They literally end up bruised and beaten from flailing around so much. And so that's, what the paralysis is for, is to stop that from happening. So you can have this rich sort of mental experience without physically moving. Now, it can go wrong the other way too. There are people who wake up, it's called sleep paralysis. They wake up, but this drug that has paralyzed the body is still working. And so they're laying in bed, fully conscious and alert, but unable to move their body for a while. Eventually, the drug leaves their body and they're able to move. But for a period of time, they're in this real state that's kind of, it can be pretty scary. It can be kind of a little traumatic for some people where they literally are awake but cannot move anything, and it feels kind of weird. Okay, so that's sleep paralysis, but it's wake when you're awake. You wake up and you're still paralyzed. For most of us, when we wake up, we're waking up as that drug is leaving our body. And so we feel a little bit of its effects. We feel a little lethargic. We feel a little heavy. We feel a little slow, but it tends to wear off pretty quickly, and then we feel fine, right? Um, yeah. So those are the two things that can kind of go wrong. But when it goes right, your body is paralyzed, and you go into dream state. Now, sometimes in the dream state, some of the things that we call nightmares, and I'll talk about nightmares and night terrors in a second, but some of the things we call nightmares are actually probably connected to the sleep paralysis. And what I mean by that is your brain can kind of sense that it can't move, but it doesn't understand the full story. Oh, I'm sleeping, and most of you guys didn't even know about sleep paralysis before this. So clearly your brain is not thinking, oh, that's what's going on. So the brain sometimes creates other sort of stories to make sense. Remember, the brain wants to make sense of things. And so if you've ever dreamed like you've been, laying down with a big weight on your chest, or you're tied down, or you're really slow, you're trying to get away from something scary or whatever, but you're really slow, you can barely move. Those sorts of feelings of literally immobility or reduced mobility are thought to reflect the fact that the brain realizes at some level it's paralyzed. And that sense sneaks its way into the dreams, but in other forms, right? And forms that make you feel like you can't move like you want to in your dream. So some of the nightmares kind of come from that. People always ask about nightmares, and really these two states, stage 4 and stage 5, there's certain phenomena that can happen in them, but they're different in the two. So in stage 4, we sometimes see people who have what we call night terrors. And people who have night terrors, they'll be sleeping along, and then somewhere in stage 4, this person will feel like, quite honestly, like they're about to die. It's a lot like a panic attack in a way. They feel like they're about to die, and very often they will sit bolt upright in the bed, and they may scream or yell or do something that basically shows that they're terrified at that moment. If you ask them at that moment, well, what's going on? Why are you so terrified? What was happening? They can't tell you. Generally, it is not a dream state. It's not like they were in some sort of dream state where they recount to you, oh, I was running away from whatever. With night terrors, they're actually more scared. They're terrified, but they don't know why, and they don't know what caused it. Okay, so it's almost more like the amygdala gets triggered somehow when they're in this deep sleep pattern, and makes them feel like they're about to die, but they don't know why. Okay, because their mind, in this slow delta, their mind's kind of asleep here. Here, when you have nightmares, it doesn't tend to be that night terror style. It tends to be more something spooky or scary or frustrating or whatever. But you don't really feel like you're going to die. You might feel a little scared, but you don't really feel like you're going to die. Okay, so there's that distinction we can talk about. All right. There's so much to talk about with sleep, and it's really hard. I don't want to go on forever here. So let me give you the next part of this story. So when this is kind of showing you these stages, that's a pretty good depiction of when you first go to sleep at night. So what we're going to look at on this graph is, this is when you first go to sleep, and this is time passing until you wake up, okay? And what happens is you actually go through these stages a number of times. The very first time you're awake, you start at stage 1, go to stage 2, stay there for a while, go to stage 3, stay there for a while, go to stage 4. They've kind of got it marked weird here. Yeah, so you're down to stage 4, and then you go up to REM sleep. Now this one actually has a brief stop in stage 2 again, a sort of light thing, I guess. Okay. But mostly you're on the path to REM sleep here, which is your dreaming. So that's sort of one whole cycle. And that's usually in the first, this shows about an hour of sleep, okay? Then what do you do? Well, you kind of do it again, but you sort of go right back to stage 2 again, and then often pretty quickly back to, and here it doesn't even show a stage 3. And so this is really just showing the variability you see. You might go all the way back to stage 4 and spend some more time in deep sleep. So you spend some more time in deep sleep, and then you come back, and now it's showing you stopping in 3 for a while, stopping in 4 for a while, but then getting to REM, spending some time in dream sleep up here. Then you go back down, and notice it didn't go all the way back down to stage 4 now. Now it kind of went to stage 3 and back up to REM, and back down to stage 3 for a while, and back up to REM, and now only down to stage 2 and back up to REM. So what's going on here is, as the night continues, you spend less time in this deep sleep. It looks like this deep sleep is really important early in the night. And early in the night, you spend a lot of time there. But as you continue to sleep 3 or 4 hours, then you spend less time in that deep sleep and more time in the shallower sleep. And in fact, more and more time in REM and dreaming sleep. Okay. One of the questions that I saw being asked in the Top Hat thing is, why do some people remember their dreams and others don't? Imagine this is when you were sleeping and you get woken up at some point. A critical question is, what stage of sleep are you in when you get woken up? If you are in one of these REM periods, then you tend to remember your dream because it's right on your mind when, just before you wake up. Now, dreams, of course, fade quickly. They fade because the whole neurochemistry of the brain changes. It's literally like you're in one state, but then as you come awake, that all changes into another state. And as your dream state goes away, it takes the dream with it, so to speak. So dreams fade really quickly. But if you're woken up while you're in a REM sleep, you're going to remember the dream. If you're woken up, like for example, anywhere here, at any point where you're not in a REM sleep, you're not going to remember your dream. Okay? So it really depends on when you get woken up. If you're left to just wake up on your own, like imagine the days you sleep in. First of all, if you're sleeping in, you're getting a lot of sleep. So you're somewhere over here when you wake up, which means this is when there's a lot of dreaming going on anyway. Later in the night as you're approaching morning. Plus, if you're just allowed to naturally wake up, this is what typically happens. You go from a dream state to awake. And so you do wake from a dream, usually, if it's allowed to naturally happen. And therefore you tend to remember the dream. So often when you sleep in, you will remember your dream when you wake up. But if an alarm clock wakes you up, or your screaming parents wake you up, now it depends where you are. Like even late in the night, if you happen to be right here when something wakes you up, you're not going to remember a dream when you wake up because you weren't dreaming. It was a while ago when you were dreaming, and that dream has faded. So when you wake up in this cycle determines whether you will recall your dream. All right. The other cool thing I always want to point out with this before leaving it is this is a really kind of cool example of how a tool like in EEG and electrocephalogram can allow us to kind of see sleep happening, right? When if you look at the person, they just kind of look asleep. But when we're looking at the brain electrical patterns, now we can kind of see something that's going on in the mind without asking the person, without waking them up. Okay, kind of cool. Tools are very important to psychology to helping us do good science. All right, let's move on from there. What's sleep doing then? Well, one of the notions, I really should have turned off my email before recording this, but anyway, one of the natural things people would think is that it might be a physical repair period. You're laying down, we stress our bodies all day long, we do various things to them, and now we're laying down and relaxing. Is this when the body repairs itself? Well, it's not clear that that's true. It seems like sleep is important to health, and especially psychological health. It's not clear it's all that important to physical health, which is a little surprising. But I have a picture of marathon runners here. Here's one of the studies they did on this that I thought was pretty clever. They went to places where there are marathons. And of course, when you have like the Boston Marathon or something, people come from all over the world to the marathon. And very often now it's not they're in a different time zone than they're used to, and they may have arrived relatively recently. And so chances are pretty good that some of them are having some sleep issues because, they're trying to go to bed when they're not tired and etc. There are these things called biorhythms in the body, and that's what makes us have jet lag when we're in a time zone that doesn't match what our body's expecting. And so they actually talked to a bunch of these marathon runners and basically said, how much sleep have you been getting the last couple nights? And they could find people that were, had very poor sleep and other people who had slept very well. If you live in Boston, this is where you live anyway, maybe you've been sleeping very well. And what they then did is said, okay, now that we know how many hours sleep somebody has had, let's see how that predicts their performance in the marathon. Because if poor sleep means your body is not repairing very well, then the people who've been sleeping poorly should perform not as well as they usually do. But what they found was that knowing the amount of sleep somebody had or didn't have did not predict their performance in the marathon. It had no effect whatsoever. So even the people who hadn't slept very well at all still did pretty well in the marathon. Now, you might think, okay, Why is that? Well, one of the thoughts is that yes, sleep isn't about physical fitness. So that's what you really need to do well in a marathon, right? You need that physical stamina. You don't need a whole lot of psychological strength to do a marathon. You do have strategies. You are planning on, going faster or slower at various points. But these strategies are ones that can unfold in this sort of gradual, slow way. And they're not a big part. It's mostly about just being able to run as fast as possible, as long as possible, right? To win a marathon. And often it's just about surviving. But in terms of your time, that's what it is. What they've found is if you go to a more complex task, something that requires more thought, you could even go as far as a chess game if you wanted. But even other things, other sports where strategies matter a little bit more, where the mind becomes a bigger part of doing well. Now, if you have a lack of sleep, you have poor performance. Okay, so if it's something complex, psychologically complex that you have to solve, then it seems like sleep is important. But for the psychologically easy tasks, even if they're physically demanding, sleep doesn't seem that important. Okay, so it's got more to do with psychology in some way. Well, what is it actually doing then? Well, we believe that it has something to do with learning, which is kind of interesting. So the idea is kind of you experience things all through the day, you have all of these interactions with the world, and then somehow at night, you do something that's called consolidation. All of that information you've been exposed to gets somehow reorganized and stored in a way that makes it accessible later. And we think that sleep, and as you'll see, even dreams, can be relevant to this. So, in fact, we see sort of two different things, one associated with deep sleep and one associated with REM. So let me just say, you can allow somebody to sleep, but you can disturb each of these things, deep sleep or REM. Okay, so deep sleep, you can wait till somebody gets to that deep sleep period and you can wake them up. And when they wake up, they'll start back at stage one or stage two and they'll go back down, and you can wait till they get to deep and then wake them up. And so they can keep, get sort of going down that slope, but never kind of being allowed to sleep deeply. Or you can prevent them from sleeping altogether if you really want to. You can also prevent REM sleep, which annoys people. Well, I mean, both of these annoy people a lot. But with REM sleep, you can let someone sleep until you start to see their eyes move, and then you can say, "Hey, hey, hey, wake up!" Like what? I just wanted you. You were dreaming, so go back to sleep now. Frustrates people as heck. But when they go back to sleep, they start at stage one or two, and they go back down. And when they get to REM, you wake them up again. So they can sleep a full 8 hours, but you can prevent them from dreaming. And so you can ask the questions. Well, what happens if you prevent someone from having deep sleep, or you prevent someone from having REM sleep? And people have done this, and they've compared different kinds of learning. So basically, if it's like the stuff you learn at university, information, going through a textbook, and learning stuff like that, if we have two different groups and they both experience a bunch of learning of information, and then we have one group that we prevent the deep sleep and the other group that we don't, what we find is the ones that are allowed to do the deep sleep remember the information better on that next day. Okay, so it's like the deep sleep consolidates information somehow. Now, this is going to sound a little vague and mysterious because it is, right? We're trying to understand the sleeping brain, and that's awful hard. But it certainly seems like if you don't allow a deep sleep to happen, then information learning is impaired. REM is a little different. Dream sleep. It seems like dream sleep is kind of the same thing, but it's about what we call procedural memory, or the learning of skills. We sometimes call this muscle memory. So learning to do things. And this could be a sport, this could be a musical instrument, this could be, well, when I was young, I worked at Wendy's flipping hamburgers. And I tell you, when I went to sleep at night, I dreamed about flipping those stupid hamburgers. It was in my dream. So the idea is that dreams are about actions and things happening. And somehow, if you are trying to learn something, let's say like a musical instrument, that if we interrupt your REM sleep, you won't learn that as well. It'll take you longer to learn how to play that instrument. If we allow you to dream, you learn it faster. So somehow this REM sleep is really important for the learning of skills, and the deep sleep for the learning of information. We know that. We don't know a whole lot of exactly why. A lot of it's still mysterious, but that's a little bit about what we know that goes on there. By the way, I just remembered another question that was coming up, which was about lucid dreaming. And let me just mention that really quickly because it's kind of a cool, weird thing. The idea of lucid dreaming is, normally we feel almost like a passenger in our dreams, that things just happen to us and we go from one fantastic situation to another one, or not fantastic sometimes. Sometimes it's pretty mundane too. We remember the fantastic ones. But the idea is if you get good at it, you can do what's called lucid dreaming. And what that means is you become the person who kind of creates the dream. Yes, you're within it. You are the actor in the dream, but you're also the producer of the dream. You can, the theory says, keep yourself asleep, but then learn to control the dream world. And create your own dreams and live, enjoy your own dreams. So a lot of people find this a very enjoyable kind of thing, people who say they can do it. And if you go to YouTube, you will find some videos that purport to train you how to do this. So, if you would like control of your dream world, theoretically, you can gain control of it. Most lucid dreaming happens just before you awake. So it's kind of like, what they train you to do is realize that you're about to wake up, but then they kind of teach you how not to wake up, sort of, not to fully wake up anyway, to keep a little bit of that sleep kind of vibe happening, that dream kind of vibe, and just have enough conscious control to shape the dream. If any of that sounds enticing to you, go to YouTube, look up how to lucid dream, and you'll find things. And then let me know if it works, if you try. I've never taken the time. Like any skill, you have to put in the time and put in the practice to see if it'll work. And I haven't done that. But if any of you do, report back. Let us know if it works. All right? Cool. Want to just mention a few sleep disorders and some things related to sleep because there's so much to talk about here. So first of all, we're increasingly realizing, so people used to kind of think about things this way. They looked at a lot of mental disorders and a lot of, we can almost stick with mental disorders, but all mental oddities. So when people start behaving really odd, what we often see correlated with that is odd sleep patterns. And so people used to think things like, oh, when you have schizophrenia, it affects your sleep. But more and more people are starting to kind of reverse that a little bit. This is kind of like correlation and causation thing here, where some people are saying, poor sleep leads to all sorts of poor behaviors. And that sleep, having a good night's sleep, is absolutely critical to our psychological wellness. So people who have trouble sleeping, who have insomnia, we see all sorts of problems, cognitive impairments, also health risks. And there's usually this worry, guilt, or stress kind of component to it. So people just can't sleep because they're thinking about things or worrying about things or whatever. Now you're getting a sense of how many emails I get in a period of time. It's crazy. At any rate, and so this is a major issue, just trying to be able to get to sleep. And it can lead to all sorts of things, as I see here. Addiction to sleep medications is a big one. Probably the most extreme case we've heard of this is Michael Jackson. And, I would like you to think about performers in general, especially, musicians, where they make a lot of money now by touring. They don't make money by selling albums. They make money by touring. But if you imagine a touring musician, they are day by day often traveling to another location, very often to another time zone. They are expected to perform at a high level, often very late at night. And then they're going to be hopping on a tour bus and they have so much time before the next date, and that's when they're supposed to go to sleep. And a lot of them have horrible sleep issues because their time zone is constantly changing and their whole time when they're supposed to be alert and active is odd. Maybe throw in some recreational drugs or something, and that even messes with their sleep more. And so very often musicians will become addicted to certain drugs, sometimes because they're trying to self-medicate, get themselves to sleep. So people who drink too much alcohol, sometimes it's just a way so they can pass out at the end of the night. But sometimes they actually start into the sleep medications, which can be very addictive. And in the case of Michael Jackson, he actually hired a doctor to anesthetize him like he was going down for surgery. And he would get anesthetized every night. And a doctor gave him too much anesthesia. That's how Michael Jackson died. So that just kind of shows, how messed up someone can get that's not sleeping well, and how much they look for ways to help them get to sleep. So it's a big issue. Now, here's one a lot of you guys are interested in. These are called parasomnias. The one we think of is sleepwalking. These almost always happen in stage 4. So the person is extremely deep sleep. They're very deep sleep. Their body is not paralyzed, and for reasons we do not completely understand, they start acting out in certain ways. So in sleepwalking, it's not all that extreme. They get up and walk and leave. It's odd because it seems like they have a certain amount of awareness for the world. They may open doors that are there. They may, do things that almost make you think they're sort of awake, but they're not. It's obvious when you interact with them, they're kind of not. And once again, you're often told don't wake them up, and the biggest reason for that is because they're in stage 4. They're so far away from reality that if you wake somebody like that up and they're suddenly in the living room, and you're trying to talk to them like they're doing something odd, it really messes their head for a while. Like, what the heck is going on here? And so it can be disturbing. It can be sort of psychologically confusing and disturbing to the person. So they'll often say it's better just to kind of push them back towards bed. Hopefully they lay down, go back to sleep, and off it goes. And many of you have seen children with this. It doesn't stop at walking, by the way. There is a lot of people who suffer sleep eating. They wake up in the morning and they find their cupboards have been raided, and then they find crumbs in their own bed or something, and they literally wake up in the middle of the night and start eating stuff. So that's normal. There's also a parasomnia that involves sexual behavior, where people, the sort of humorous story I like to tell, and you can look, it's called sexsomnia. Do a search on sexsomnia. It'll kind of blow your mind a little bit. But the classic example was someone who, or the funny example I always think of is, apparently this woman was talking to her husband at one point and said, I something I've been wanting to talk about for a long time, but when we're intimate, like often you're very soft and gentle and stuff, but like every now and then, and especially when it's like the middle of the night, you're much more sort of aggressive, and I kind of like that. So she was telling the guy she kind of liked that, and he was basically saying, what? What are you talking about, middle of the night? And so he was asleep during those episodes. He was not aware that this was even going on, and yet he, was sexually functioning, etc. So that's a crazy one. Look at sexsomnia if you want more of that. Also, if you want something really kind of creepy related to that, some of these parasomnias involve violent behavior. There's one case in Toronto where a guy drove halfway across the town and killed his ex-in-laws, not as a very good criminal, leaving evidence everywhere, and drove back to his apartment and went to sleep. And when the police tracked him down, which was pretty easy, he said, I kind of half, like, it feels like I kind of half dreamed about that happening, but I was asleep. I certainly didn't intend to do it. And, the scary thing is he got found not guilty. And is it scary or is it not? The reason why some people have gotten off on criminal cases like that is because we can see a signature of it in the EEG. People who suffer from these parasomnias, there's something about their brain waves that are a little different. I don't have all the details, but I know somebody can do a sleep analysis of them and can confirm that, yes, this is the kind of person whose body does not get paralyzed on occasion, and they act out these weird kinds of half dreams, half not, whatever, but can they be held responsible? Would you like to be responsible for everything that goes through your mind when you're asleep? Fascinating issue. So I'll leave that for you to look more at. Okay. There's so much more we can talk about, and in this, altered states things. I mentioned other things. I mentioned drugs. I mentioned sensory deprivation. Those things are covered in the textbook a little bit more. I just stuck to sleep here because it's the one we actually understand best. I think. Well, we understand drugs and behavior pretty well too, I guess, but you'll enjoy learning that. So I leave that to you. This is the end then of chapter 5. Chapter 6 will be tomorrow, and we will have a student presenting that. See you there. See you guys. Bye bye.